Welcome to Colton Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod, to another episode of Cult and Classic Films Podcast, the podcast where we usually bring you two thematically linked films, one mainstream and one cult, and talk about them both. But today, we have a very special episode. I have with me two of the members of Bond vs. Godzilla podcast. They are an awesome podcast, which I enjoy, which you can check out on YouTube. We'll give you all the links. But they usually talk about a James Bond film and a Godzilla film, sometimes two Godzilla films, switch it up. As we like to do here on the pod as well. But with us, we have Cruz. How are you doing, Cruz?
Doing awesome. Thanks for having us.
Of course. And we also have Jacob. How are you doing, Jacob?
Oh, doing great. Thanks for having us.
All right. Yeah, of course. Well, and there's an additional reason to have you guys on besides the fact that we love your podcast. It's also because you guys are doing Bad News from Outer Space at the Palm Springs Cultural Center. You've done a couple of shows. You've got another one coming up on April 9th. Why don't you tell us about Bad News from Outer Space?
So it's our personal love letter to Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Riff Tracks, where we've been huge fans of them for years. And last year, the Cultural Center was asking us to come up with something creative for a summer program. And we're like, well, we haven't had stand-up comedy here, and we don't have an audience to have bad movies coming in. So why not combine both and see if there is an audience out here that has an appreciation for that? And surprisingly, we got a lot of people for all three shows that were both fans of Mystery Science Theater and who had never seen this kind of stand-up before. So we're very happy to be coming back this year with a second season.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And for those of you who are local to Palm Springs, definitely check it out. Tickets are great. I think it's like $5 or something. Very affordable.
Too much for these horrible films.
Well, and that's the thing. You also get to see these on the big screen, which isn't a very common occurrence. And we also are joined now by Charles. How you doing, Charles?
Doing good things. How are you guys doing today?
We are A-OK. Okay, so I want to talk first. Let's talk about the pod. How did Bond vs. Godzilla start?
It was a combination of sheer boredom from quarantine and the fact that I realized that our other co-host of the podcast, Willie Crook and Jacob, had seen all the Bond films and I'd seen all the Godzilla films. So we're like, okay, we need something to unify us during this boring and terrifying time. So let's make this podcast, and it's been going ever since.
That's great. And of course, Cult and Classic Films, we know all about quarantine podcasting as well. It was sort of podcasting boomed during lockdown, and we all know why. It's something that most of us have access to create. And it's just a way to get out there, especially when you're locked behind room. In fact, we're not in the same, none of us are in the same place at the moment. So this is the wonders of technology.
Yeah, the amazements of the modern world in which we have nothing better to do. So let's just listen to each other talk all the time.
Right. And well, what's amazing about it is learning then that other people want to listen to us talk is sort of mind-blowing, but I appreciate it. We love our listeners.
Few years into doing this, and that still boggles me, that there are still people out here that want to listen to my nagging opinions on things.
Yeah, what I love is and please, listeners, write in info@cultandclassicfilms.com. We love to hear your opinions. I especially love the hate mail. You can send that directly to Tad here at info@cultandclassicpodcast.com, because people end up having their favorite their favorite people on the pod, and oftentimes I find their favorite people are the ones that they disagree with most vehemently. We had filmmaker Chris Sieber on here, who came on essentially at the beginning just to deny a point that I made about a movie of it, and it was great. But yeah, so Bond vs. Godzilla podcast. When you guys are, first off, where can people find Bond vs. Godzilla?
If you go on YouTube and type in Bond vs. Godzilla podcast, then you'll find us there.
Very nice. Very, very good. Easy to find. I also found, this is an interesting thing, and I don't know if you guys have talked about this. If you just do some nice Google detective work on Bond vs. Godzilla as well, there are treatments for crossover movie flicks, which are quite fascinating. I would love to hear those reviewed at some point as well. So Bond vs. Godzilla transition to also hosting Bad News from Outer Space. You guys have a movie, Bad News from Outer Space, at the Cultural Center coming up that you're going to riff on April 9th. What is that movie? Why did you choose it?
It is Night of the Lepus, the cuddliest giant monster movie ever made about giant rabbits rampaging Arizona in the 1970s. We chose it because we try to find films that are going to correlate with something and have an excuse to bring us back. We didn't want to wait till the summer, so we're like, okay, well, Easter's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible giant rabbit monster movie. It's Year of the Rabbit, Easter. This is the best way to celebrate it, in our opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of the trifecta, you know. It's and this is so I love Night of the Lepus. It has one of my favorite people in it, DeForest Kelley, who of course played McCoy
Right.
Bones from the original Star Trek. This is
You'll be
one
happy
of
to know
his.
that we have plenty of damn it, Jim, I'm not a this blank. I'm a duck.
Good, good. Yeah, it's great to see him, and it also has like it's sort of a buffet of 70s names and 70s even at the time kind of washed up. Like you have Rory Calhoun, Janet Leigh, Stuart Whitman. It's kind of wild. Also, I will just throw this out there. If anybody has a one sheet, the original one sheet for this movie, it has the best, most insane. You do?
I got
Cruz
one from
does.
Australia for our show.
It is wild. It is one of my favorite posters of all time. It is one of those that has almost nothing to do with the actual film itself. Super. Is it the one with the eyes that kind of melt down, or
Yeah,
is it the one with photo?
my
There's several.
favorite.
It's brilliant. Regardless, love it. Absolutely love it. And now the lepus. Lepus is, of course, I believe the Latin genus, right, or something along those
Yeah.
lines for rabbit. And it is literally about giant rabbits, and they use. Oh yes, it's beautiful, beautiful. And also those listeners, you can check out this on video eventually when we upload it. But also, Bond vs. Godzilla will upload the video of this episode to YouTube. So if you want to see all of our smiling faces, you can check that out. Okay, so tell me about the setup, because we here at Cult and Classic Films Pod, of course, lovers of Mystery Science Theater riff tracks. We even had Mary Jo Peel and Bridget Nelson on here in the past to talk about movies. Listeners can go back and check that out. We talked about um, two parental killer movies, including So I Married an Axe Murderer. It is a fun time. We love it. Tell us the setup at the Culture Center. How did you go about setting this up? And when people walk in and sit down, what do they get from the Bad News from Outer Space experience?
It's kind of a very humble welcoming. We have a bar for anyone who would like to, make it a little bit easier on themselves going through these movies. We have trinkets, goodies that relate to the films, wristbands. We've had sheriff badges, cans of shaving cream for Ega when they cover his face in shaving cream and he eats it. We're sponsored by Nothing Bundt Cakes. It's an amazing local company in the desert.
So good.
Yeah, and it's just a plethora of just endless bundt cakes. And then we have a TV setup with like a shrine of 70s and 80s sci-fi and horror books and movies. And we have Mystery Science Theater playing on the TV as well for people who are not familiar with it or they just want some nostalgia to kind of get them ready. And then from there, they'll go into the theater. We'll have our 3 podiums set up with our scripts and the film on screen. And yeah, pretty much the same setup as Riff Tracks. And thankfully, it's definitely difficult, but at the same time, easy to set up and something that practically costs us nothing because these films are really easy to acquire.
Yeah, I love it. And I gotta say, there's so much room for riffing in our world because we don't get as much as we used to. Riff Tracks has been very prolific and has done more than Mystery Science Theater accomplished at that time, because it's, as you said, they're also easier to produce because they're not under a broadcast schedule, right? And streaming rights and download rights are often more easily obtained than television broadcast rights. So we get a lot, but we don't get a lot of live riffing. Riff Tracks does a couple a year, which are wonderful, and I'm sure we all check out. But then there's Cinematic Titanic occasionally does tours. Dumb Industries is another one where a lot of alumni have been ducking in for some streaming stuff. But there's a lot of opportunity for this kind of live riff performance. And like you said, it is a live performance. Like when we're used to watching Mystery Science Theater riff tracks, there's this added element when you're in the room, even if somebody kind of messes up or flubs, like riff tracks, Kevin Murphy flubs all the time in the live shows, and that's totally great because it's you're there with the audience, and the audience reacts and feeds the process. So
It's kind of one of the reasons why we wanted to do this show, because it's the kind of show that you don't really often get to see. Combining movies with stand-up, it's so unique, and you can't just sit around and wait for riff tracks to come to a theater near you. We'll bring it to you in our theater, and that live element of it is it brings that extra dimension. Like you said, we'll often do like small little like throwaway trivia at the beginning of the show, and we'll throw you a goodie bag with some stuff in it sometimes. And occasionally we'll make a mistake, and then we've gotten to the point now where the three of us are so in tune to each other's comedy that should one of us like make a mistake, that's a perfect opportunity for like the guy next to us to rib us and give us a hard time and allow the audience to laugh at that. So it does create this dimension, this feeling that, yeah, this movie is horrible, but we're all in it together.
Yeah. And there's just something about hearing an audience like laugh or groan at like a bad joke or a poorly tasted joke that just really adds to the experience for us as well.
For sure. And like you said, and it's kind of getting to that point. There's an element of improv to it as well. It's scripted, of course, and you would, for the most of us, we would want it to be, right? Because we've all been sitting in our living room and made funny quips at the TV. But if you were to film someone watching that, you quickly learn that those funny quips are usually few and far between for most of us. So when you script something, what's your process? I know riff tracks, they watch the movie and stop it, pause it, right, rewind. Like, how do you guys come up with the jokes for your riffs?
It's pretty much the same thing. We'll start off just hanging out at someone's house, get a bunch of pizza and stuff, and just sit and try to survive the movie, rewind and go back. And then I'll just be like, okay, guys, break. And we'll spend a couple weeks just on our own, suffering in our rooms, staring at a screen going, how do I make this scene of a helicopter taking off funny? And then we'll reconvene. And we go in blind when we do our first rehearsal. We just go through the script, see what everyone wrote, and just respond naturally to what we wrote. And we find ourselves laughing at everything that we've written. And from there, we do it a couple more times until we perfected it, and then unleash it up on the world.
That's great.
It takes several rehearsals to stop laughing at our own jokes.
Yeah.
That's sometimes good though. There's that borderline. I've done stand-up for many years, and some stand-up comedians do this thing where they are never laugh at your own material because the audience won't laugh. And then others, like Kevin Hart, does nothing but laugh at his own material, and there's this happy medium where you want your presenters to have fun. If it takes a lot of work to have an effort or to have a persona that's not happy, even in Mystery Science Theater, they have the outer skit elements, right, where these movies are being forced upon this hapless crew of watchers who don't want to do it. But then when they're in the movie, there's this element of joy and engagement of, as you said, Jacob, I think you said you're surviving the movie together, right?
Yeah.
You guys are it brings everyone to the point where they're saying, okay, this is farcical, let's just roll with it. And I love the sort of organic process you guys have with everybody bringing scripts together, because that is one of those things. It reminds me, and also with the gag bags and things, it reminds me of setting up a Rocky show, right? Which I know the Cultural Center is also doing a shadow play of. You've got like there's a million callbacks, and every different group, every different region has different callbacks. So when you come in, one of the great things about seeing a Rocky performance or shadow play, is the audience participation. You'll hear callbacks that you've never heard before after seeing the show for decades, and some of them you'll hear the most vile, repulsive, and you laugh and you don't want to, and you can't help it, and you'll never forget that riff. So I love that element. So this is the one that you guys have for Easter, obviously perfect. I personally watch the South Park Easter Pope episode every year. That's my that is my Easter tradition. What is on the horizon? Do you guys, can you talk about what's coming up in addition to that for the summer? Is it still open? Is it under wraps?
Well, if we're successful for this Easter show, we're hoping to come back for 3 more shows in the summer. The only real theme that we have is let's pick a film from each different decade so we can show the world that every decade has its own share of horrible films. So
I love that.
For June, we want to do Beyond Evil from the 80s. July, we want to do I Come in Peace from the 90s. And in August, right?
I come
Need
in
to
peace
show
with
people that
Dolph
movie.
Lundgren. Is
Yeah,
that what you're talking? Yes, of course. You come in peace, but you go in pieces. Yes, that
right.
is
Yeah.
one of the most. Yes.
Also
Anyway,
known as Dark Angel, which isn't as good as I Come in Peace.
no, I come in peace is the best title for that.
Yeah.
And
And
you
then
said, did you have
August,
one for the 2000s?
yeah, for the 2000s, we want to do Shark Attack 3 Megalodon.
Megalodon, and you could probably get that one as well. I'm trying to think. Shark Attack 3. Well, anything with Tara Reid is always going to be a good time in the theater. Here's
We
now
have
I'm still thinking.
John Barrowman is a star of that one. I think Tara Reid is Sharknado.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Shark. That's right. So I haven't seen. I'm gonna have to check that out because I have not seen that one. Then, so I'm still stuck on Come in Peace. I beg you guys to give out blank CD discs.
That's exactly what we're gonna do.
Okay, I beg. So
We're
if
gonna
anybody
try to
has
find as many AOL free hours of whatever.
so beautiful, absolutely love it. Yes, okay. My brain is just exploding on the Dolph Lundgren track right now. So when you guys now at some point, I'm not going to say you'll run out of Bond and Godzilla content. It is still ever present. But have you guys thought about, because for example, here at Colton Classic, we release weekly, so we had to keep it very broad because we will always have stuff to talk about. You guys, I'm sure will have stuff to talk about, but have you thought about what could exist beyond Bond and Godzilla films, given the fact that, especially Bond, there is a limit to the amount of films that they have thus far?
Yeah, I mean, you say that we've actually already hit that limit in the
Right.
recordings. The episodes aren't all out yet, but we have we've hit the end of Bond, and there's only a select few Godzillas left that that we're going to do. So in terms of the scope of the original project, we are at the tail end of things. The whole thing started as a passion project between us to be like, hey, just two nerds shoving their greatest love down each other's throats, as nerds are wont to do.
It's true.
So that original scope of it, I mean, is essentially mission accomplished at this point. I've successfully turned these guys into Bond fans, and they've successfully turned me into a Godzilla fan. So mission accomplished. In terms of what's next, we've had some idlings and discussions between each other of are we going to continue on? Currently, things are kind of standing in an odd place because we're not all going to be local for much longer. By the end of the year, we have people that are kind of moving on to the next chapter of their lives. So it's kind of a things where we're playing with the ideas of what wouldn't be fun if we continued. But I think right now we're still kind of just focused on that initial goal finish line that we set for ourselves, and we're right at the threshold of crossing that. And then it's kind of at the point of we'll see what's next.
For sure.
At the moment, we have 2 Godzilla films left that are going to be paired with the Kingsman films because Jake feels that those are the natural progressions to go to. And then there is supposedly a new Toho Godzilla film coming out at the end of the year, which will be paired with the last Kingsman film. So we have ideas for side missions. We want to do GoldenEye paired with Godzilla video games.
I was going to say the video games are rich content. I also,
and then there's the original Rodan. There's other kaiju films. So
that's
there's
right.
But we're happy with the complete podcast.
Sure, and that I totally respect that. It's also sort of more of a it's a seasonal. A limited engagement is not a bad thing. I will also pitch the animated series, such as the original American Godzilla film animated series and Bond Jr.
I've been wanting to show them James Bond Jr. forever now. I said this exact thing. Why aren't we pairing James Bond Jr. with Godzuki? Well, come on.
Exactly. You got to have Godzuki. Yeah, there are limitless things, and I think that as what we've discovered from Colton Classic Films is that there is truly a limitless supply. You guys could always do the many Turkish James Bond films. There's Pulgasari, the North Korean kaiju film. created by kidnapped directors. There's all sorts of things. So never end. And I will say this, Cult and Classic Films podcast, we are all at different places. We are rarely in the same place. So there's a chance, but I would love to see what comes up in the future. So I want to give you guys a chance. Where
Podcast.
can people, pardon?
Oh, I said, well, one of the benefits of the podcast, thankfully, is that since we all work at the Cultural Center, we
Mhm.
can see these on the biggest screen in Southern California. So in the
Yeah.
event that, one of us is missing, it will be kind of sad, but it is a one-of-a-kind chance to see both film series the way they were intended.
And that's pretty fantastic because, and also it's really, I mentioned earlier, but it's a huge benefit to these Rift things because we make fun of bad movies typically because we also love them, right? I mean, there's something inherently adorable and like really it creates there's an attainability to a bad movie that is somehow relatable to us, and I think that's why people are drawn to them even when they're cringeworthy or when they're boring, which is so often the case without riffs. And getting to see them on the big screen is wild because we are just not used to that. I mean, Night of the Lepus, it premiered in like 1972, 73, and to get to see it on the big screen, that's one of the things I am super excited about because you haven't lived, in my opinion, unless you've taken the opportunity when presented to see bunny rabbits with red tempera paint on their teeth filmed with a terrifying score in complete close-up. And also, I will pose that this film is in many ways a kaiju film because they build these elaborate tiny sets and have rabbits just run amok in slow motion through them. There's also a great scene with a half rabbit suit and a mauling by a person in a rabbit suit, which is pretty great. It makes Seth Green's werewolf on Buffy look realistic. So thank
Jake
you
has
guys so
kind of
much for
here for that one. Jake, do you remember it when we see that costume?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I remember it. Yeah,
it's one of
I
my
don't-
favorite.
No, I'm not. I'm obviously not going to say here, but I think the moment when the rabbit costume comes up is probably one of my favorite jokes in the entire thing. So it's
Yeah, same here. Although my condolences go out to the person who had to wear a rabbit suit in Arizona, of all places.
Sure. Yeah, I one of these days I'm looking forward to filming like a Bigfoot film out here in the desert just so I can get real sweat coming through a Bigfoot costume. I think it'll be very, very biologically accurate. So thank you guys for being here. Where can people find you if you want to be found? What are
So
your
they
handles,
You
etc.?
can find us at Bond vs. Godzilla podcast on YouTube. For my personal work, you can go to cruzmoore.com or youtube.com/separateway. Jake?
yeah. Honestly, I don't really have much of a social media footprint. I currently have personal projects in the work that are still in the planning phases. I have not got into the phase yet of setting up the platform where theirs are going. So for the time being, I'm kind of in the dark. So instead, I was just going to point the finger over at Cruz, watch Cruz's stuff. It's really good.
Great. Charles, do you have anything? Do you have anybody you want anybody to follow you?
Honestly, at this point, Cruz is still the best focal point to follow me on. Yeah, try dodging that. My social media footprint is quite neglected, and I don't plan on fixing that for some time. So for quite a while, Cruz will be the best way to find me for a while.
Well, and that's okay because Cult and Classic Podcast and Cult and Classic Films utilize everyone's spare space online. We post incessantly. So check us out at Cult and Classic Films on Instagram and Facebook, Cult and Classic Films and Cult and Classic Podcast, and on YouTube, Cult and Classic Podcast. We will be running this video episode eventually, but it will also go up on the Bond vs. Godzilla podcast. So you guys can catch us there much more quickly. And thank you all for listening so much. Please go to the Palm Springs Cultural Center website and book your ticket for the April 9th show of Bad News from Outer Space, a live riffing of Night of the Lepus from 1972, starring the one, the only, the much missed DeForest Kelly. I consider him the star. I know he's not the star, but he is star enough for me. Thank you all, and please rate, like, subscribe, all that jazz wherever you get your podcasts. Do the same for Bond vs. Godzilla podcast on YouTube. And if you have any questions, email us, complaints. Hey, I hate the sound of your voice. Hey, do this movie. Hey, where's Tad? I like when he curses, whatever. Write us to at info@cultandclassicfilms.com. If you write a review on a podcast site, please take a screenshot, send it to us via email or Instagram, and we will send you a swag bag. I promise it is real swag. It is not just garbage that I shoved in a box, although I guess
That's
that
what
is
we
the
give away.
definition. Yeah, I was gonna say, it is. I guess it depends on how much you like pins, buttons, stickers, etc. So
my pins are not garbage.
I wasn't talking about your pins. I was talking about like the shaving cream and crap.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
That's garbage.
There's AOL discs. I heard you can insulate your house with them, so there's definitely some use there. Thank you all so much for listening to this special episode of Cult and Classic Films podcast. And to play us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil.